The career of Jerry Lee Lewis slammed to a halt after marrying his young cousin.
His legacy will always be tarnished by the scandal that derailed his career.
Has the thought ever occurred to you that a seemingly little action someone made may have far-reaching consequences for your seemingly peaceful life? This is a really negative statement for a lot of individuals. But little Myra wouldn't get a chance at this. Her life would be taken from her before she could even begin to have a say in it. Famous for being the child bride of rock and roll legend Jerry Lee Lewis, Myra has revealed surprising details about their marriage and its impact on both of them. The circumstances before the marriage must be addressed before we can reveal Myra's perspective. The unexpected partnership between Jerry Lewis and Jay Brown, the birth of a musical odyssey. The first of Jay and Lois Brown's two children, Myra Gail Brown Lewis, was born on July 11, 1944. Her childhood was filled with plenty of affection from her parents and younger brother, Rusty, and everything seemed to be going according to plan. Even though he had a natural gift for electric guitar, her dad had to work odd jobs to support the family. As the family finally settled in Memphis, Tennessee in 1949, Jay was forced to make yet another career switch. He had the position of lineman filled out for him by the Memphis Light, Gas, and Water Company. Working on the power lines was an unregulated and exceedingly risky task for him to do back then. On a tragic day, Jay was involved in an accident that affected his family deeply. He was in a potentially fatal position and hurt himself badly while working on the electrical line. Because he was bedridden and required rehabilitation, he took a year off work to get well. In light of what happened, he and his family decided that returning to his previous employment was a terrible idea. Hence, he had to find a new way to make ends meet. When life gives you lemons, make lemonade, goes the old adage. It was just this that Jay Brown accomplished. Because he was skilled, or so he thought, he made the bold but well-considered choice to begin a professional music career at this moment. But it's not as simple as he imagined to get into the music industry. To climb the corporate ladder or simply capture the public's and sponsors' attention, he needed a secret weapon. He contacted Jerry Lewis, his cousin, in an attempt to attain his aspirations by forming a band. At the time, Jerry was a talented but unrecognized musician, but Brown heard his cousin Jerry play the piano and compose stunning music. Jerry had been trying to get into the music industry for a long time, and he was living in Louisiana when everything happened. Although Brown wasn't a part of either, he was more seasoned, and the concept of musical bands was appealing to recording studios at that period due to the prevalence of rock and roll. As a result, Brown chose Jerry as his bandmate. Myra claims that her father convinced Jerry to move to Memphis. Even though he was not enthusiastic about the idea at the time, they simply received a phone informing them that he was coming, because Jerry was having trouble getting a record contract. Nevertheless, due to the intense competition in the sector, those wishing to achieve success were compelled to innovate or do something fresh. It was crucial for Brown to secure a record deal, and he had faith that his cousin has the skills to help them do that. Nevertheless, he failed to anticipate that his action would irrevocably impact his small daughter, Myra's life. Or did he? We must briefly revisit Jerry Lewis's musical past in order to grasp the gist of this narrative. Jerry Lee Lewis was from a poor farming family in eastern Louisiana. He was born on September 29, 1935, in Faraday. When he was a kid, he and his relatives started playing the piano together, and his parents finally took out a mortgage on the farm so he could buy his own. What a selfless act. In order for him to focus only on gospel music, his mother enrolled him at the Southwest Bible Institute in Waxahachie, Texas, but he got booted from the assembly for turning the gospel tune "My God Is Real" into a boogie-woogie. Nonetheless, he was unstoppable. He then became a member of the emerging rock and roll genre by performing in nightclubs in the Faraday and Natchez areas. Continue with our tale. Jerry, who had some background working in recording studios, lacked the contacts that Brown had at the time to further his musical career. But Brown was very excited about the idea of starting a band with him. Assignment to convince Lewis to travel to Memphis, though. because he was determined not to endure another round of rejection from record labels. However, Brown was aware that this time was different, and by any means necessary, he persuaded Lewis to go to Memphis in order to launch his career. Brown took Jerry to Memphis, and when he got there, the young guitarist had fresh aspirations that he thought would come true. Sam Phillips was the local music magnate at the time, and Brown took Jerry Lee Lewis to see him at Sun Studios. Expectedly, it was also challenging to persuade Phillips to listen to them and chat more about giving them a chance. To convince Phillips to give them an opportunity to pitch, they had to be very persistent and convinced. He didn't think they had a chance of winning because Brown was a tired linesman and Jerry was a rookie musician with no connections. It was like striking gold for Sam Phillips when he finally consented and chose to listen to them through his music producer and engineer Jack Clement. Phillips was astounded by the young man's abilities and was blown away by this choice. He had an instant insight that he might catapult him to stardom. At Jerry's audition, Jack Clement recorded Jerry performing Ray Price's Crazy Arms and Jerry writing and performing his own song, End of the Road. Jerry was later dubbed the Killer in rock and roll due to these recordings. Brown was able to make his case and get credit for bringing the roving, unannounced star to the rock and roll world because of Jerry's rising star power. In December 1956, Jerry Lewis began recording for Sun facilities both solo and as a session musician for other Sun artists and other major Sun-affiliated facilities. This was all within a very brief time frame. Artists like Carl Perkins and Johnny Cash were among them. Even though he only had 2 years to do it, Jerry left an indelible impression on rock and roll. His contributions to Carl Perkins' Matchbox, Your True Love, and Put Your Cat Clothes On are audible. In the song Flying Saucers Rock and Roll, he also portrayed Billy Lee Riley. Jerry settled into the warm and inviting Brown home in 1956. He was welcomed with open arms. He and Brown would have regular dinner-time hangouts, jam sessions, and studio sessions. Myra and Rusty, his second cousins, were constantly amazed to be linked to someone so brilliant and talented, and they were always in awe of him. Everyone in the Brown family adored Jerry and took great care of him, treating him like a member of the family. He got quite close to his extended family, especially his second cousins, who were enchanted by his singing and couldn't tear their eyes away from him. Lewis was highly esteemed in the Brown home since he had great rapport with the children and never missed an opportunity to regale them with tales from his days in the recording studio. When Myra initially laid eyes on Jerry, she thought he lacked flair due to his goatee, plain red shirts, and cowboy boots. As a result, she wasn't very fond of him. But this changed as time passed. When Jerry was away from the studio, they got very close and spent all of their free time together. In general, the family was pleased with their guest because he provided entertainment and, well, made money. Since he was also wonderful with children, there was no way that anything could go wrong. Myra was 12 years old when Jerry began to develop love feelings for her. She became more of his focus, and he frequently brought her to the movies. Given that Myra was the elder of the two siblings, had a higher IQ, and could hold her own in a discussion, this didn't raise any red flags at the time. Consequently, the Browns paid little attention to the intimacy between their daughter and the celebrity guest. Conversely, Myra relished the spotlight. After all, who wouldn't desire to be associated with an exceptional talent destined for global fame? His company was always enjoyable, and she thought he was a fantastic human being. Her amazement and admiration for him were comparable to that of a celebrity and a fangirl, but that was about it. Her long-lost relative had developed love feelings for her, but she was unaware of it. What she didn't anticipate was that this resemblance would cast a shadow over the promising future of the then burgeoning celebrity and throw a wrench into her apparently ordinary existence. When Myra was 13 years old, Jerry had already achieved a great deal of recognition as a musician. With Elvis Presley gone on military duty, he planned to take the crown of King of Rock and Roll by going on tour. His star was clearly not going anywhere anytime soon, and now was the ideal moment to celebrate his enormous accomplishment. But Jerry made a choice that would impact his life and the lives of little Myra forever. Something incredible occurred before the impending media-exclusive drama that was looming over the Browns, Lewis and Son Studios as a whole, and it is still regarded as a watershed point in the history of music. Who can say for sure what transpired? Perkins unexpectedly paid a visit to Sun Studio on December 4, 1956, accompanied by his brothers Clayton and Jay and drummer W.S. Holland, after a remarkable success in his album, Blue Suede Shoes. He had come in with the intention of recording some new materials. Sam Phillips and Jerry Lee Lewis were also present at the studio, and Phillips asked Jerry to play the piano for the session. Elvis Presley, who randomly visited the studio, had listened to the playback of Perkins' session from the control room and, after pronouncing it to be good, joined them in the studio. Soon after, the jam session began. The jam session was said to be purely coincidental. At some point during the session, Johnny Cash joined them in the studio by pure coincidence, although it was recorded that he had come in to hear Perkins. John Clement, who was engineering that day in a bid not to miss such an iconic moment, decided to record it. During the session, Phillips called a local newspaper journalist to the studio who wrote an article about it, which was released the next day under the headline, "The $1 Million Quartet." At this time, it should be noted that Jerry's songs were to be released in a few days. This jam brought about raging popularity, particularly for the young star Jerry. He won the hearts of the public, and everyone could only see that Tennessee was just a starting point for Lewis. There was no stopping the star, but everything came down when Lewis, not minding the consequences of his actions, set out and executed a plan that cost him his shine in rock and roll. Lewis informed the Browns a few days after this famous $1 Million Quartet scene that he was returning to his hometown in Louisiana. This was par for the course. He likely missed home. On the other hand, Lewis's goal for that trip was not just out of the ordinary, but utterly repugnant. By enlisting the help of an old female acquaintance, Lewis was able to have Myra Brown legally married to him in a fictitious marriage, even though this was against the law in Louisiana. However, Lewis was unconcerned about the complexities of the law and was able to get a marriage license in his name. It would have been expected that Lewis would have left the Brown home as soon as he began to amass a fortune, but he stayed. This was hardly surprising, but his reasons for remaining would enchant you. One regular night, as the family was having dinner, Lewis casually asked Myra if she wanted to go to the movies with him. This wasn't strange. In fact, it was completely okay and normal, so long as she was brought home early enough to get enough sleep in order to prepare for school the next day. Myra, who hadn't had such outings with her favorite cousin due to his recent travel and music engagements, rushed into the car in excitement as they headed out. There were no speculations or suspicions, as this was almost like a routine to her. Little did she know that this night was different from others she had experienced before. She didn't notice anything suspicious in the behavior of her distant cousin, but after a while, what she did notice put her in fear. They were not heading to the theater. In fact, it was almost as though there was no destination at all. It seemed to her that her dear cousin kept on driving without a definite location in mind. Out of curiosity, she looked towards him and asked him where they were headed. After what seemed like an eternity, they reached an unfamiliar location, and Lewis pulled out a marriage license from a compartment of the vehicle and handed it over to her. She opened it and felt the wildest shock of her life. This scary but real paper had both their names on it. Myra couldn't believe her eyes. This had to be a joke. That was when Lewis clarified that it was just the marriage license and that they would really get married in the future. This scared young Myra was sent into her own confusion. Although she knew she had a crush on her cousin, a marriage license bearing both their names was a different ballgame entirely. It was more like she had gotten married without giving her consent or having any say in the matter. She was also very worried about how her parents would respond to the news. After all, how could any reasonable parent let their daughter be taken from them by someone they had taken care of for so long? She thought her parents would be so angry that her father might even murder Louis. Despite her repeated rejection of the marriage, Louis insisted that their alliance was perfectly legal. He pointed out that although the U.S. had a law against marriages between cousins, there was no such law against marriages between distant cousins. Besides, Louis didn't let the legal ramifications affect their relationship. Even when she brought up the potential reactions of her parents, Louis remained unfazed. All that mattered to him was loving and wanting her, and nothing else. She knew he was crazy, thinking her dad wouldn't kill him for what he had done. She couldn't comprehend how they could be at a dinner table one minute and then married the next. At that age, she didn't fully grasp the concept of marriage. To her, it meant a man would get down on one knee, propose with a ring, and she would answer yes, not something like what was transpiring at that very moment. Myra returned home in a state of terror, and though her new husband Louis hadn't exactly told her to keep quiet about his actions, she understood the seriousness of the situation and chose to do so out of fear that her father would murder Louis. Despite the complexity and confusion of the situation, she wished Louis a long and happy life, so she went to school the following day as if nothing had transpired. For 5 or 6 days she pretended not to know, but the weight of this secret continued to grow. Eventually, the burden became too much for the young Myla to bear, and she made the decision to inform her parents about their marriage. She refrained from telling Louis that she wanted to tell her parents about their marriage, knowing that he would prevent her from doing so. Myla knew that what she was about to do would create such great unrest in her home. But what could she do? She was tired of carrying the burden alone, so that fateful day, Myla left the marriage license on the table where it would be visible to her mother. And true to her thoughts, her mother found the license and read the contents. Lois was enraged, but her anger could not be compared to that of her husband's, Jay. Hell let loose in the Brown home. No words could explain the feeling of betrayal and resentment Jay felt towards his cousin. He had given Louis a successful career that had far greater impended successes, a roof over his head, and food. He couldn't bear the pain his cousin had caused him, and true to Myra's fear, Jay made up his mind to kill Louis for what he had done. Louis at that time was at Sun Studio for work. Jay picked up his pistol and headed out enraged to Sun Studio with his mind made up to kill Louis. His wife Lois had to curb the situation immediately, hence she put a call across to Phillips and told him about the situation. She told him that Jay was on his way to the studio to kill his talented young star. He promised her that he'd handle the situation, a promise he kept. Immediately the call dropped. Phillips put Louis at the back of the car, drove him to the airport, and booked the next flight for him out of town, giving him very strict instructions not to return until he was told to do so. For fear of his life, Louis left. Upon returning to the studio, Phillips subdued the enraged Jay Brown, telling him that the marriage between his daughter and Louis was final and that they could do nothing to change it. Philip also reminded Jay of their upcoming big tour with Louis, which must not be jeopardized, and that no matter how much Jay hated him, he had to let the sleeping dog lie. The next time Jay saw Louis, it was for a musical performance. He had to make sure the performance went well. A few days later, Louis came back, and Sun Studios was getting ready to crown him king of rock and roll. Presley had been drafted into the army at the time, so Sam Phillips devised a perfect plan to assert his dominance in rock and roll abroad. The musician's tour to England was a major part of this plan. This was a golden opportunity. Jay had to set aside his grudges with Louis. Myra, Louis's young bride at the time, had decided to accompany him on the tour. Despite strong objections from Louis's managers, he insisted that she be allowed to go. He threatened not to go if she was asked to stay behind. Upon arriving in England, a nosy journalist who was interested in the star's private life approached Myra and asked her to identify herself. Myra said, "Oh, I am nobody." In response, he said, No, who are you, miss?" I responded, "Well, I am nobody, but you know I am Jerry's wife." Myra claims that anyone watching the scene would have assumed that she had just shot a cannon into the air. The journalist hastily fled the scene. She realized she had messed up badly at that same second. Her story goes something like this. "If Jerry's managers had been smart enough to tell me to keep my mouth shut, hopefully I was smart enough that I would have done it." She felt like a secret, even if she didn't realize it. Despite her feelings of shame, she couldn't understand why they had treated her so subordinate since she was a youngster. After that, Lewis's career plummeted. Nobody savaged the situation. The British tabloids lost it. Lewis was slammed mercilessly. The tour was ultimately canceled due to the extreme campaigns demanding its cancellation and the deportation of the singer. They returned to the United States under the false impression that things would be different. They were both criticized by the media. When questioned about their expectations for the flight home, Myra reportedly said, "You know," in one of the interviews, "we believed it would all go away when we returned home because we were so naive, not dumb but just plain stupid when we were young. Upon our return to the United States, we had anticipated hearing, 'Oh, you poor babies. They treated you so badly. Come on in and let us make it right.' However, this was not to be the case. They made the United States seem bad. There was no improvement. Multiple radio stations banned his music once the story circulated rapidly. Lewis had no one to blame but himself. He had pushed through Sam's objections to bring Myra along despite his lack of media expertise. When Presley became connected with young Priscilla, he too was entangled in a controversy. But the public's reaction to Lewis's affair was different. Unlike Lewis, Presley was able to keep his profession steady after marrying her. Therefore, it had no impact on his career. However, this controversy was very detrimental to Lewis. People threw away their tickets, radio stations stopped playing his songs, and he became a laughingstock. Even when he did appear, the theaters were rarely packed, and the few patrons who did show up would inevitably boo and insult him for being a horrible human being. After earning over $10,000 each night, Jerry Lewis began to struggle to make $100 per night. As Myra said in an interview with Rolling Stone, though, all of it was merely hearsay. Various stories were circulated and not all of them were true. Everything went global in 1958 when it exploded in London. De Gaulle was pushed off the newspaper's main page as a result. It was false that Jerry was booed since the crowd was supposedly playing to a half-empty house. Everyone was so anxious to meet Jerry that Scotland Yard stated, "We don't know how to protect you." Fans were clamoring on buildings, peering through windows, and generally attempting to locate us. As a result, we were unable to leave. Furthermore, Lewis did not hold his young wife responsible for anything that had transpired, contrary to popular belief. Myra claims that he unexpectedly did not act out of rage or treat her harshly as a result of what happened. On the contrary, she claims that he strengthened their relationship as a result of the attack. Their optimism for a new day, a brighter future, and a triumphant return was the same as it had been every day since the controversy began. Sadly, this was delayed until around a decade later, when he resumed his career in country music. Despite Lewis's undying love for his young bride, the sudden twist in his seemingly idyllic destiny hurt him. He and his wife, Myra, had a strained relationship due to his alcohol and drug addictions. She insisted he could go between being so kind and charming to openly aggressive and daring with her in an instant. After having 2 children together, the couple eventually divorced and continued to get along as co-parents. However, their harmony was shattered when Lewis wed his 7th wife. I never lost the first name 13-year-old child bride Myra. I think that's on my birth certificate now. I don't think I ever resented it for me, though. I always resented it for what they did to Jerry. It wasn't harming me, it was harming somebody I loved. That was the pain of it. I was seeing someone punished because of my age and my existence, and I always wanted to just stand up and defend him. Myra filed for a divorce from Lewis in 1970, citing adultery and abuse, claiming that she had been subject to every type of physical and mental abuse imaginable. The marriage had already suffered due to Lewis's drug addiction, drunkenness, and infidelity. Jerry Lee subsequently said in an interview, "It was all my fault. She caught me cheating." Myra is now a realtor and novelist leading a respectable, peaceful life. Among her works are Great Balls of Fire, the uncensored story of Jerry Lee Lewis, which was made into the 1989 film Great Balls of Fire. Despite her admiration for the film's talented and affable cast, she was dissatisfied with both the book and the film. Realizing that neither could compare to her own narration, she published her memoir, The Spark That Survived. She resides in Duluth, Georgia, with her third husband, Richard Williams. Until next time, take care and subscribe for more videos like this one. If you enjoyed this one, please press the like and comment button.